To them, he was just another old man, a relic from a forgotten time, standing awkwardly in the cathedral of modern architecture that was his daughter's home. His hands, gnarled and thick with the memory of 1,000 projects, looked out of place against the pristine white walls. He had traveled over 1,000 miles, a pilgrimage of love across the country, fueled by faded photographs and the hollow echo of infrequent phone calls. But as he stood on the polished marble floor, his worn work boots leaving no trace, he felt the vast, cold distance not in the miles he had traveled, but in the sterile air between himself and his only child. Her request, when it came, was not a shout but a whisper, a carefully worded suggestion wrapped in the silk of feigned concern, yet it landed with the force of a wrecking ball, shattering the fragile hope he had carried with him on the long bus ride. "Dad," she had said, her eyes flitting towards the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a manicured lawn, "Marcus and I are having some people over tonight. Important people. Maybe it would be best if you just rested in your room. It's been a long trip." The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone of dismissal. He saw the flicker of shame in her eyes, the shame of him, of his simple clothes, of his quiet, unassuming presence that did not fit into the curated perfection of her new life. To them, he was an inconvenience, a piece of the past that didn't match the decor. But what they didn't know, what she had long forgotten, was that the very principles of structural integrity that held her ostentatious house together were principles he had not just learned, but perfected. They didn't know that the quiet man who was being asked to hide in the basement had once built things that touched the sky, structures born of genius and grit that would outlast them all. His name was Samuel, and his silence was not emptiness, but a vault filled with unspoken heroism and a legacy forged in steel and stone. The request was a betrayal, a small, casual cruelty that would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, revealing that the foundation of a man's character is far more important than the facade of the house he lives in. He simply nodded, the deep lines on his face betraying no emotion, his voice calm and steady. "All right, Jessica." He asked for nothing, not even the respect he was due. He just turned and walked towards the guest room, his slight limp a steady, rhythmic beat of dignity against the cold, unyielding floor. The injustice was a hairline crack, small and barely noticeable, but Samuel knew better than anyone how the smallest fissures could bring the grandest structures crumbling to the ground. He could already feel the tremors. Welcome to a story that reminds us that true strength is quiet, that honor needs no audience, and that heroes often walk among us, unseen and uncelebrated. If you believe that the measure of a person is in their character, not their appearance, then be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspirational content, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Samuel's journey was more than just a trip, it was a testament to a father's undying hope. For 5 years, he had lived in the echo of his daughter's life, piecing together her world from brightly filtered photos she posted online and hurried conversations that always seemed to end with her rushing off to another important meeting. He lived a life of quiet solitude, a deliberate retreat from a world that had once tried to place him on a pedestal. His small home, attached to a workshop that smelled perpetually of cedar and machine oil, was a sanctuary of his own making. Here, he was not a myth or a legend, but simply a man who understood the language of wood and metal. His hands, which had once drafted blueprints that defied gravity, now spent their days crafting intricate wooden toys for children he would never meet, each one a small act of creation, a quiet protest against a world obsessed with demolition. He had sold the sprawling family home he had built with his own 2 hands, the house where Jessica had taken her first steps, to give her the down payment for her new life, for the architectural marvel she now called home. It was a sacrifice made without a second thought, a quiet transaction of love that required no receipt. He never mentioned it, and in time, it seemed Jessica had forgotten it too. Her world was one of glass and chrome, of networking events and social hierarchies, a world meticulously constructed by her husband, Marcus. Marcus was a man who wore his ambition like a well-tailored suit. He was a rising star in a prestigious architectural firm, known for his sleek, minimalist designs that were aesthetically pleasing but, as Samuel noted with a practiced eye, often lacked a fundamental understanding of the materials. He saw Samuel not as a father-in-law, but as a relic, a dusty antique that clashed with his modern sensibilities. He judged the old man by his calloused hands and his simple, direct way of speaking, mistaking his humility for ignorance. Samuel, in turn, saw the arrogance in Marcus, the dangerous confidence of a man who has read all the books but has never truly understood the weight of a single steel beam. He saw the pride that comes before the fall. On his wrist, partially hidden by the frayed cuff of his shirt, was a faded tattoo, a stylized compass rose, its 4 points aligned not to north, south, east, and west, but to 4 virtues: integrity, strength, purpose, and humility. It was the mark of a forgotten guild, a secret society of master builders who believed a structure was only as strong as the character of the people who built it. To the unknowing eye, it was just a weathered design. To the few who knew, it was a symbol of legendary status, the quiet signature of a master. Samuel carried his past not as a burden, but as a foundation, a core of who he was. He never spoke of his accomplishments, of the bridges that soared across impossible chasms or the tower that had become a city's icon, because he believed that a man's work should speak for itself. He had built his masterpiece, the Century Spire, and then, overwhelmed by the adulation and the noise, he had simply walked away, choosing the quiet dignity of anonymity over the hollow echo of fame. He had given his daughter a foundation of love and sacrifice, and he had come over 1,000 miles hoping to see that she had built a good life upon it. But as he sat in the sterile silence of the basement guest room, the muffled sounds of laughter from the party above filtering through the ceiling, he feared that she had built her beautiful house on sand, ignoring the bedrock of what truly mattered. The inciting incident was not a grand explosion, but a quiet closing of a door. It was the moment Jessica, her face a mask of anxious hospitality, came down to his room just as the first guests began to arrive. The sound of cheerful greetings and clinking glasses echoed from the grand foyer above, a world away from the cool, silent concrete of the basement. "Dad," she began, her voice a strained whisper, as if the very walls were listening, "they're here." She held a small, neatly folded towel in her hands, wringing it nervously. "I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable." But her eyes told a different story. They darted towards the staircase, filled with a desperate plea for him to remain unseen, to not disrupt the carefully orchestrated illusion of her life. Samuel sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, his worn travel bag at his feet. He simply looked at her, his gaze steady and unreadable. He did not need to speak. The silence between them was filled with years of unspoken words, of a growing distance that was now as tangible as the concrete walls around them. The humiliation was not in her request, but in her reason. It was in the shame that radiated from her, the palpable fear that he, in his simple authenticity, would somehow tarnish the gleaming facade of her success. "Marcus thinks it's for the best," she added, deflecting the ownership of the decision, a small act of cowardice that stung more than the request itself. The party was in full swing, a symphony of polite laughter and intellectual posturing. Marcus was in his element, gliding through the crowd, a glass of expensive wine in hand, accepting compliments on the house he had designed. "It's all about deconstruction," he explained to a captive audience of admirers, breaking down traditional forms to create a new spatial dialogue. Samuel, unable to bear the confines of the basement, had quietly made his way to a small, shadowed alcove on the main floor, a vantage point from which he could observe without being observed. He watched his daughter laugh a little too loudly at a joke told by a man in a ridiculously expensive suit. He watched Marcus place a proprietary hand on the small of her back. And he watched the house itself. His eyes, trained by a lifetime of seeing not just what was there, but what was missing, scanned the soaring ceilings and the dramatic, cantilevered balcony that jutted out over the garden. It was on this balcony that the climax of the evening's disrespect would unfold. As more guests drifted outside to admire the view, drawn by the cool night air, Marcus cornered Samuel in his alcove. "Enjoying the view from the cheap seats, old-timer?" Marcus sneered, his voice low and laced with contempt. "Try not to wander off. We wouldn't want the guests to think we've hired you." The insult was direct, a deliberate blow meant to assert dominance. Samuel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "That balcony," he said, his gaze fixed on the crowded structure, "the support beam is under too much tensile stress. The load is not distributed correctly." Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Okay, Rambo," he mocked, the name a casual dismissal of a generation that understood sacrifice. "I'm going to need you to move along. The real architects have it under control." He made a show of straightening his tie, a gesture of ultimate condescension, and turned his back on the old man, leaving him in the shadows. But the conversation had not gone entirely unnoticed. A young man named Leo, a junior associate from Marcus's firm, had overheard the exchange. He had been watching Samuel all evening, intrigued by the old man's quiet intensity and the way he seemed to analyze the building not as a guest, but as a master craftsman. He had seen the faded compass rose tattoo when Samuel had reached for a glass of water, and a flicker of recognition, a memory from a dusty textbook on architectural legends, had sparked in his mind. The incident was a turning point. It was the moment the antagonists solidified their role as ignorant foils, their arrogance blinding them to the truth standing right in front of them. The stage was set, the tension was building, and the structural integrity of both the balcony and Marcus's carefully constructed world was about to be tested. The rising action began with a subtle, almost imperceptible groan from the balcony. It was a sound that only a trained ear would notice, a low thrum of stressed metal and compressed concrete, a whisper of imminent failure lost beneath the din of the party. But Samuel heard it. He felt it in the soles of his feet, a vibration that traveled up his spine like a premonition. He watched as Marcus, the triumphant host, led a new group of guests onto the already crowded terrace, encouraging them to admire the uninterrupted panoramic view his daring design afforded. Each new person who stepped onto the cantilevered slab was another pound of pressure, another step closer to disaster. The antagonists, blissfully unaware, escalated their disrespect, their ignorance a fortress around them. Marcus, having dismissed Samuel's warning, now openly mocked him. He gestured vaguely towards the alcove where Samuel stood and quipped to a potential client, "Every masterpiece has its critics, even the unsolicited kind." The line drew a wave of sycophantic laughter. Jessica, for her part, avoided his gaze entirely, her complicity a silent, painful affirmation of Marcus's cruelty. She busied herself by refreshing drinks and adjusting canapes, her movements sharp and brittle, a portrait of a woman desperately trying to hold together a fragile reality. It was the observer, the young architect Leo, who began to connect the dots. His initial curiosity about the old man had now blossomed into a full-blown suspicion. The overheard warning about the balcony, dismissed so arrogantly by Marcus, had lodged in his mind. He had seen the quiet confidence in Samuel's eyes, the certainty of a man who doesn't guess, but knows. The compass rose tattoo haunted him. He discreetly pulled out his phone and, under the guise of checking his email, typed in a few keywords: Compass Rose Tattoo Architect Guild, Legendary Master Builder Anonymous. The search results were sparse, filled with crackpot theories and forgotten forums, but one entry caught his eye. It was a blurry photo from an old article about the construction of the Century Spire, the iconic tower that had redefined the city's skyline. The article spoke of the project's enigmatic, anonymous creator, a master builder known only by the symbol he left behind on a single, hidden beam, a compass rose. The camera of the journalist had zoomed in on the forearm of a figure in the background, a man in dusty work clothes, and there it was, the same faded tattoo. Leo's heart hammered in his chest. He looked from the photo on his phone to the old man in the shadows, and back again. It couldn't be. The quiet, disrespected father-in-law couldn't possibly be the silent architect, the most revered and mysterious figure in modern architecture, a man whose genius was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones in the lecture halls of his university. The tension in the room was now twofold. There was the literal, physical tension building in the structure of the house, a secret held by Samuel and the groaning steel. And there was the narrative tension, a secret now shared between Samuel and the young observer, Leo. The disrespect had reached its peak. The ignorance of the antagonists was absolute. The audience surrogate, Leo, now knew the truth, creating a powerful sense of dramatic irony. The stage was perfectly set for the climax, for the arrival of a witness who could bridge the gap between the quiet hero and his forgotten legacy, a witness who could finally give a voice to Samuel's silent strength and bring the entire charade of Marcus's world crashing down. The air was thick with impending revelation, and the rhythmic creak of the straining balcony was the ticking clock counting down to the moment of truth. The climax arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, authoritative click of expensive leather shoes on the marble floor. The room, which had been a sea of chatter, seemed to part as a man entered, his presence commanding an immediate and absolute silence. He was older, with a shock of silver hair and a face that seemed carved from granite, etched with intelligence and an uncompromising sense of authority. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but it was his eyes that held the room captive, sharp, discerning, and accustomed to looking at things and seeing their true worth. This was Alastair Finch, the world's most renowned architectural critic. He was not merely a guest, he was an event. His reviews could make or break careers, and his praise could elevate a building from a mere structure to a timeless piece of art. Marcus, who had been holding court, froze mid-sentence, his face paling. Finch was his idol, the man he most wanted to impress, and his unexpected arrival sent a jolt of panic and elation through him. He rushed forward, hand outstretched, a fawning smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Finch. What an incredible honor. I had no idea you were coming." Finch barely acknowledged him, his handshake a brief, dismissive formality. His sharp eyes swept across the room, taking in the soaring ceilings, the minimalist furniture, the vast expanses of glass. His expression was one of profound disappointment. "A house, I presume," Finch said, his voice a low baritone that carried to every corner of the silent room. "Lots of glass. Very transparent. It reveals everything, doesn't it? Especially a lack of soul." The words were a surgical strike, deflating Marcus's ego instantly. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Finch's gaze continued its sweep of the room until it landed on the shadowed alcove. And there, it stopped. The critic's entire demeanor changed. The look of bored disdain vanished, replaced by one of utter, unadulterated shock, which quickly morphed into something else, reverence. He took a step forward, then another, his movements slow, deliberate, as if approaching a holy site. He walked directly past the stunned Marcus, past the bewildered guests, and stopped directly in front of Samuel. The room held its collective breath. Finch did not offer his hand. Instead, he simply stood there for a moment, his eyes fixed on the old man's face, and then, in a gesture that sent a shockwave through the room, he gave a short, formal bow of his head, a sign of ultimate respect. "I don't believe it," Finch whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "After all these years. I truly thought you were a myth." He then looked down and gently, respectfully, took Samuel's wrist, turning it slightly to reveal the faded compass rose tattoo. He looked up at the stunned crowd. "Do you people have any idea who you are in the presence of?" His voice was no longer a whisper but a resonant proclamation. The monologue that followed was the moment the power dynamic of the entire evening irrevocably shifted. It was the reveal. 20 years ago, Finch began, his voice ringing with gravitas, a building was erected that changed the world. The Century Spire. It wasn't just a skyscraper, it was a testament to human ingenuity, a defiant act of art and engineering. It was built with techniques no one had ever imagined, with a structural integrity so profound that when the great earthquake hit a decade later, it was the only major structure in a 100-mile radius that suffered not so much as a single crack. It saved thousands of lives that day. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The world clamored to know the name of the architect, the genius who had designed it. But he was nowhere to be found. He refused the awards, the accolades, the fortunes he was offered. He had built his masterpiece and then, he vanished, leaving behind only a single, cryptic mark on a hidden girder, a compass rose. Finch turned his gaze back to Samuel, his eyes shining with awe. They called him the Silent Architect. A legend. A man who built for the sake of building, not for the glory. A man who understood that the true legacy of a creator is not in his name, but in the strength and endurance of his work. He looked directly at Marcus, his eyes cold as ice. You build glass boxes that you think are monuments to yourself. This man built a monument to humanity and asked for nothing in return. This is Samuel. And he is the greatest builder our generation has ever known. The falling action was the silence that followed the storm of Finch's words. It was a profound, heavy silence, a vacuum that sucked all the air and arrogance out of the room. The sound of a single ice cube cracking in a forgotten glass seemed to echo like a gunshot. No one moved. No one spoke. The faces of the antagonists were canvases of shame and disbelief. Marcus stood as if petrified, his jaw slack, his face drained of all color. The smug, condescending architect had been publicly, brutally deconstructed. His entire career, his sense of self-worth, was built on the pursuit of the very recognition this quiet old man had so effortlessly discarded. He looked at Samuel, not with hatred, but with a terrifying, hollow sense of his own insignificance. He was a child who had been playing with blocks in the shadow of a pyramid. Jessica's reaction was a silent implosion of grief and regret. The truth of her father's identity, a history she had vaguely known but had allowed herself to forget and belittle, had been thrown into the harsh light of her own superficial world. Every act of dismissal, every moment of shame she had felt, now replayed in her mind as a litany of her own failings. She looked at her father, this quiet, humble man she had asked to hide in the basement, and saw him for the very first time, a giant. Tears welled in her eyes, hot with the shame of her betrayal, of valuing the opinions of strangers over the honor of her own blood. The honor she never knew he truly had. The guests, who moments before were fawning over Marcus, now stared at Samuel with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. They were courtiers of a false king, suddenly confronted with the presence of a true one. Their whispered conversations now turned to hushed, reverent murmurs about the century spire, about the legend of the silent architect. In that moment, as the weight of the revelation settled, a sharp, cracking sound split the air. It came from outside. Every head turned towards the balcony. A visible fissure had appeared at the base of the cantilevered slab, a dark, jagged line against the white concrete. The guests who were still on it scrambled back inside, their faces etched with panic. The imminent danger, predicted by Samuel and ignored by Marcus, had now manifested. It was an immediate, terrifying validation of the master's judgment. Samuel, his expression unchanged by Finch's grand pronouncement, simply looked at the fractured balcony. He turned to the now humbled critic and spoke, his voice as calm and steady as ever, the first words he had uttered since the reveal. "The rebar is improperly spaced," he said, not with malice or an air of, "I told you so," but with the simple, factual tone of a diagnostician. He relied on aesthetics, not physics. The statement was a final, damning verdict on Marcus's entire philosophy. Alastair Finch nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the failing structure. "Of course," he said quietly. "Of course it is." The honor of the quiet hero had been restored, not by his own hand, but by the undeniable truth of his expertise and the reverent testimony of a true authority. The antagonists were shamed into a silence far deeper and more profound than the one they had tried to impose on him. The party was, for all intents and purposes, over. All that was left was the wreckage of pride and the quiet, unshakable presence of a humble, vindicated father. The resolution was as quiet and unassuming as the hero himself. With his honor restored and his legacy revealed, Samuel did not stay to accept the apologies or to bask in the newfound awe of the crowd. That was never his way. The validation he had received was not something he had ever sought, and he wore it as lightly as he had worn the disrespect that preceded it. The party dissolved quickly, the guests leaving in a state of bewildered excitement, whispering about the night they met the silent architect. They cast furtive, respectful glances towards Samuel as they departed, as if seeing a historical monument that had suddenly appeared in a suburban living room. Alastair Finch approached Samuel one last time, shaking his hand with genuine warmth and admiration. "It has been the honor of my life, sir," he said simply. Samuel just nodded, a flicker of a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Just watching," he replied, a quiet echo of his stoic nature. Jessica finally found her voice, her words choked with tears. "Dad. I am so sorry. I didn't know. I forgot." She couldn't finish, her shame was too great. Samuel turned to face his daughter. He looked at her, at the beautiful, fragile life she had built, and saw not a monster, but a child who had lost her way, who had mistaken the scaffolding for the foundation. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his rough, calloused hand a stark contrast to her perfect skin. "The foundation is what matters, Jessica," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Everything else is just decoration." He then turned and walked towards the front door, picking up his small, worn travel bag that he had retrieved from the basement. He had arrived through the back, hidden away, but he would leave through the front, his dignity intact. Marcus, who had been standing silently in the corner, a ghost at his own party, finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Wait." Samuel paused at the door but didn't turn around. "I can fix it," Marcus stammered, gesturing feebly towards the broken balcony. "I can fix the house." Samuel's reply came without hesitation, a final lesson from the master builder. "The house isn't what's broken." And with that, he opened the door and walked out into the night, leaving the quiet hum of the expensive refrigerator and the shattered silence of his daughter's home behind him. He didn't look back. The hero was vindicated but remained humble, returning to the quiet anonymity he cherished. He left behind a powerful lesson about the enduring importance of integrity, humility, and the unseen sacrifices that form the true foundation of our lives. The final image was of Jessica and Marcus, standing alone in their vast, beautiful, and suddenly empty house, the hairline crack in their balcony a stark, physical manifestation of the much deeper cracks in their own foundation. They had everything, and they had nothing. The narrative had come full circle, ending not with a celebration, but with a quiet, powerful reflection on the lesson learned, that what we build in our character will always be more important than the structures we build with our hands. The story you've just witnessed is more than a tale of vindication, it's a powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or seek the spotlight. Often, they are the quiet ones, the humble souls whose strength is forged in sacrifice and whose honor is written not in headlines, but in the steadfast integrity of their character. We live in a world that often celebrates the loudest voice, the flashiest success, and the most polished facade. But as Samuel's story shows, true greatness is built on a foundation of humility, expertise, and a quiet dedication to doing what is right, regardless of who is watching. It reminds us to look beyond appearances, to question our own judgments, and to recognize the silent strength in those we might otherwise overlook. The world is full of people like Marcus and Jessica, who become so entranced by the appearance of success that they forget the principles that give it meaning. And it is also full of people like Samuel, whose quiet contributions form the very bedrock of our society. They are the parents, the mentors, the craftsmen, the silent heroes whose work and sacrifices make our world stronger, safer, and more meaningful. Their reward is not applause, but the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, a life well lived. What does true strength mean to you? Is it the power to command a room, or the quiet integrity to stand by your principles when no one is watching? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We believe that stories have the power to change the world by changing the way we see each other, and we want to hear your perspective. Your voice is a vital part of this community, and your insights help us all to grow and learn. By sharing your thoughts, you contribute to a conversation that goes beyond the screen, a conversation about the values we choose to live by and the kind of world we want to build together. If this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart and made you think, then please help us share it with the world. Click the like button to let us know that these are the kinds of stories you want to see. Your likes are more than just a metric, they are a message to us that we are on the right track, creating content that inspires and uplifts. Every click helps to make these narratives more visible, allowing them to reach others who may need to hear this message of hope and quiet strength. And if you haven't already, we invite you to become a part of our growing family by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you ensure that you will never miss out on our latest videos, each one crafted to deliver a powerful, emotional, and thought-provoking experience. Our goal is to create a space where inspirational storytelling can flourish, a community built around the shared values of honor, integrity, and the recognition of everyday heroism. Hitting that subscribe button is the best way to support our mission and to join us on this journey. Don't forget to also click the notification bell. In today's busy digital world, it's easy to miss out. The notification bell is your guarantee that you'll be the first to know when we release a new story, allowing you to be an immediate part of the conversation. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your incredible support. It is because of viewers like you that we are able to continue telling stories that matter. You are not just an audience, you are our partners in spreading a message of hope, reverence, and the enduring power of the human spirit. We are deeply grateful for your time and your engagement, and we look forward to sharing our next story with you very soon. Until then, remember to look for the silent heroes in your own life and to build your own days upon a foundation of strength and character. Before we conclude, let us reflect once more on the central theme of our story, the profound and often invisible power of a humble life. Samuel's journey was not one of seeking recognition but of remaining true to himself in a world that had forgotten the value of his quiet virtues. His heroism wasn't found in a single, dramatic act, but in a lifetime of consistent, honorable work. He was a man who had mastered the art of building, not just with steel and concrete, but with principles. He understood that a structure's ability to withstand a storm is determined long before the winds begin to howl. It is determined by the integrity of its initial design, the quality of its materials, and the care with which its foundation is laid. This is a powerful metaphor for our own lives. The respect we ultimately command is not a result of the titles we hold or the wealth we accumulate, but of the character we build, day by day, choice by choice, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. The world may be captivated by the grand balconies and the floor-to-ceiling windows, but it is the unseen foundation that prevents the entire structure from collapsing under pressure. Marcus had built a life that was visually stunning but structurally unsound. He was arrogant, dismissive, and valued appearance over substance. His downfall was not just the public humiliation, but the terrifying realization that his entire life was a facade. In the end, the quiet, humble man he had dismissed as a relic was the only one who could diagnose the fatal flaw not just in his house, but in his worldview. This story challenges us to reconsider our definition of success. Is it the admiration of a fickle crowd, or is it the unwavering self-respect that comes from living a life of integrity? Is it the pursuit of fame, or the quiet satisfaction of creating something of lasting value? Samuel's choice to walk away from glory, to find fulfillment in the simple act of creation and the quiet dignity of his work, is a radical act in our modern world. It is a testament to the idea that a person's worth is not measured by how many people know their name, but by the positive impact they have on the world, no matter how silently it is made. He teaches us that true honor is not something that can be given or taken away by others, it is something that resides within, a quiet, internal compass that guides our actions and defines our legacy. It is the silent strength that allows us to endure disrespect with grace and to accept vindication with humility. It is the bedrock upon which a meaningful life is built. Thank you for joining us for this journey. We hope it has left you feeling inspired and with a renewed appreciation for the quiet heroes who walk among us every day. Remember that every life is a story, and every person you meet is a chance to discover a new chapter of the human experience. The greatest tales are not always the ones that are shouted from the rooftops, but the ones that are whispered in the quiet acts of daily sacrifice, courage, and love. Our mission is to continue to find these stories and to bring them to you, to shine a light on the kind of heroism that doesn't seek the spotlight but deserves it the most. We are committed to creating content that does more than just entertain. We aim to create content that resonates, that challenges, and that ultimately connects us all through our shared humanity. Your support makes this mission possible. By engaging with our content, you are casting a vote for a different kind of media, one that values depth over sensationalism, and character over celebrity. As you go about your week, we encourage you to carry the spirit of Samuel with you. Look for opportunities to build, not to demolish. Listen to the quiet voices that are often drowned out by the noise. And above all, remember to check your own foundations. Are you building a life of integrity, strength, purpose, and humility? The world needs more silent architects, more people who are dedicated to making the world a stronger, better place, not for the applause, but because it is the right thing to do. We are profoundly grateful for your time and attention. Your presence here is what gives these stories their power and their purpose. We do not take your support for granted, and we will continue to work hard to create content that is worthy of it. From all of us here, thank you, and we will see you in the next story. Stay strong, stay humble, and continue to be the hero of your own tale, building a legacy that will endure long after the noise has faded away.